Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast. I am so super excited today. We have a fantastic guest. It's Michelle McKenna, who's the CIO and Senior Vice President at the National Football League. How cool is that, right? Michelle is a great friend of mine and someone who's been a client for many years. She has, prior to being the CIO of the NFL, she was, I probably will miss something in her long history, and I will, well, I mean, not that long, but I will give her the opportunity to introduce herself. But, she was the CIO at Constellation Energy, which is part of Exelon, one of the world's largest energy companies. Prior to that, she was the CIO with Universal Studios theme parks, another really cool role. A part of that, she was a senior executive with Disney, and I know along the way she's had another couple cool roles. She's been on the boards of some major public companies. So she speaks regularly at conferences, including she's been invited to speak by Amazon and Google and others. So really an awesome person, someone I'm really excited to get to work with on a regular basis. And with that, I will introduce Michelle. Hey, Michelle, thanks again for being here.
Hey, Howard, thanks for having me.
So I want to give you the platform to introduce yourself and tell everyone a little bit about your career and journey. I would imagine there's probably a lot of people who are watching, being the CIO of the NFL. That sounds pretty cool. How can I become the CIO of the NFL? What's the career path that gets you there?
Well, I guess, if you're wishing that, you might want to be careful what you wish for. These are some crazy times. But yeah, I mean, I started my career on the business side of the house as far as, what my official training was. I have a background in accounting and finance, and that's how I did a couple of year stint with PricewaterhouseCoopers right out of college. And I always felt like, and my daughter, I encouraged her to follow those same footsteps, because I feel like accounting and finance is not always fun, but it really is the language of business. So I think just getting a start there was, and I saw so many different businesses that I realized that I loved. Anytime there was a change that went on, I would end up being an auditor that, either we were selling a company or buying a company, and most people were complaining about those audits. And I loved doing those kinds of audits, which were combinations of companies, which meant reorganizing teams. And I realized pretty quickly that somehow I wanted to be involved in that. And so I left Disney, I left PricewaterhouseCoopers, went to Disney.
I just have to interject on one thing, which is to say, I know your daughter Maggie, who you just mentioned, just passed her CPA exam.
Yes, she
did.
How
about that? That's so awesome. Congratulations. And please congratulate her for me.
During the studying portion, she was like, "What the heck did you convince me to do, Mom? This is the worst idea you ever had." But then when she got her passing grade, she still has 3 more parts to go. So we're not declaring victory yet. But getting that first one is a big one. But yeah, so I left PwC, ultimately got hired briefly by MetLife, who was one of my clients. And MetLife was a large owner of commercial real estate, maybe one of the largest in the country. And they had a huge portfolio of hotels. And since I love to travel, I did a lot of asset management on the hotel side of things. And that's how I got really introduced to Disney, because not many people know, but the Dolphin and the Swan is a joint venture. It's on Disney property, but it's a joint venture between MetLife and Tisch Realty. So I was part of that as a MetLife employee, and really, I'd always been a huge Disney fan and loved Disney from a child. But I realized what a great experience it would be to learn from there. So I ended up moving my family to Orlando and took a job at Disney, where I stayed for 14 years in a variety of roles. And I'd say that was how I got to be CIO of the NFL, was the fact that I worked in almost every single department. I started in finance and planning, but I worked in operations. I worked in marketing. I worked in sales briefly. I used to do all kinds of things, and Disney was such a change forward company. And that's sort of what got me hooked into the IT world, is I transitioned from marketing and strategic planning into IT at Disney. And I never left then. So, and then from there, a couple more cool jobs. One, many of which we've worked with together. We launched the Wizarding World of Harry Potter together. You were a big part of that with me. That was amazing. And then I moved north, and everyone up here is like, "What? You're going the wrong direction." Most people go north to south. But yeah, so I've been in New York now since 2012, and the CIO of the NFL.
Amazing. It's an amazing journey. So for anyone who just wants the cliff notes, if you want to become the CIO of a major sports league, get a job at PwC, then go work for a major life insurance company, and that's going to lead you down the path, right? So who would have thought? It's unknown secrets to so no, that's amazing. And I know part of it is the trailblazing that you've done along the way, because it's not just where you've worked, but it's the roles that you've played. And correct me if I mistake this, but you've sought out, I think, projects that were challenging and risky and really were transformational for the organizations that you worked for. And then, of course, played a leadership role in those, which both gave you the opportunity to shine. And I'm guessing also learn a heck of a lot, because as we both know, doing those things is never the world's smoothest path. So I'd love your thoughts on that whole realm. And by the way, in my introduction, I totally neglected to mention that you kindly wrote the introduction to my new book, which is coming out in October, Winning Digital Customers. So thank you so much for that. She wrote an awesome introduction. In fact, once you could just read that, I would say just buy the book and read Michelle's introduction, and you really don't need to read the rest of the book. That is worth the entire price of the book. So just buy it for that. But anyway, part of what that book is about, of course, and what we've worked so much on is this area of how do you get these behemoth companies, because we've both spent our careers working with big corporations, and then trying to do these transformational projects, I know is challenging. So love your thoughts on, well, first of all, maybe we start there. What are some of the biggest challenges and roadblocks you faced on some of the different things you've tried to do at some of these companies?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. As far as where you work is very important, but what you do there and the role you take, which means, the old adage, no pain, no gain, or no risk, no reward, is very, very true. If you want to stay safe, you can certainly have a great career at many, many companies, but you won't get the big roles and the big chances if you aren't taking risk. And so I did naturally navigate in the very beginning, even when I was first out of college, to today. If I see something that is something that's a change or will change the way people think about something or react or do, that's what makes me come to work every day. And being a CIO, I found, is such a rewarding job, because it's not the same job every day, and you can decide to be in a certain role where you'd rather have a more predictable daily routine. But I really love being attracted to those big transformations. So I can give a few examples, and then we can dive into each one if you'd like as we go through. But I'd say Disney, the first one was, honestly, Disney already, when they had the standard for what it is to have an amazing guest experience. And so one of the best things was choosing a company that you can match your standards for excellence with. No corners would be cut. No, it was just understood that we either do it the right way or we just don't do it. And I loved that, which meant I felt like I had permission to bring things up that were controversial or people didn't agree on. If you had a common culture that said, we're going to do it right or not do it at all, that gives leaders and change leaders a chance to say, this isn't personal. Let's just talk this through. I don't feel like this is right, or this isn't how we should do it. And so ultimately, my sort of nitpicking around data and the lack thereof when I was in marketing. So I was in marketing back when we were pulling lists or email lists from American Express and buying lists. And I was sitting there as an analyst building, at the time, what I later learned was called shadow IT. I was doing building, tables and trying to pull in our own data, which was so rich. If you thought about the data that lived in Disney systems and why were we buying lists when this data was, to me, it seemed like such a simple thing. But I very quickly learned from my IT colleagues, oh, be careful. Yeah, this is not simple. All this data is buried in all these systems that frankly weren't engineered for the internet age. They're not open systems that you can pull data and match across, say, a res system in the hotel versus a theme park ticket. And so that just became my passion to why can't we fix that? And that why ended up resulting in a multi-$100 million, 4 or 5 year journey to change all the sales and marketing and reservation systems at Disney, so that one day, we didn't know that one day people could wear bands and just tap in and out. But we figured, and this is what's great about working for a visionary company, is you figure one day you might need to be ready for this type of stuff. And in the middle of that, 9/11 happened. And that was a time when leadership really steps up. It always does in the middle of a crisis, but it for sure did there, because our business disappeared overnight. And therefore, every belt got tightened and all projects got halted or cut, with the exception of this big IT project. So now all of a sudden, not only is it a cool IT project, but everybody's watching, including the board of directors of Disney, because frankly, it's the only thing being funded at the moment. And our president at the time of Disney theme parks said to me, well, this is when we double down, because we really do believe in our product and we need to be ready when America comes back to vacationing. And we were, and now you can see all of the many things that have come out of that. The Disney's Magical Express, the Fast Pass, the band that you wear. I mean, there's so many things that got built on that. So that's really where I learned about how to drive change and how to stick with and be convicted. And then you move it, and I think you asked early. Yeah.
It makes me think, and that's great. And I didn't realize that the 9/11 was in the middle of that. That's so interesting to me. Yeah, it reminds me, of course, of what's happening today with the pandemic, but also when we were working together at Universal Studios theme parks, because that was in 2008, where we had really just begun a very transformational project when, the housing bubble burst and the market tanked and the economy was in shambles, and so much there as well. Same thing, really, everything was getting slashed except your big project. It was the one thing, maybe not the one thing. There were a few other things like, some other parts that were related to the Wizarding World, but it was one of the few things where they said, no, we need to preserve this. So I'm curious, maybe it's two questions in one, but I'm curious how you got these things off the ground, because I would guess, and tell me if I'm wrong, but even at Disney, you might not have been the first person who had the idea that we should fix this problem. I mean, maybe you were, but usually when I come along, I'm not the first person to realize there's a need, but it's the question of who's the person who kind of injected the leadership to get it happen. And similarly, even at Universal, I wonder, what is it that you've done with these projects? It's hard for me to imagine it's only the merits that makes people not cut them in difficult times, but also something about the leadership, the positioning, the way that people are helped to understand why they're so important. But tell me if I'm wrong, but that's my guess.
No, I think it's very true. And I think certainly, and I've heard this from my dad, who is military, is, you're not usually the front line. Once you're successful, a lot of people may have sacrificed their lives or even frankly their careers on the way to trying to push forward an idea. And so some of it is timing, but some of it is just knowing when to be bold and courageous, and also feeling convicted enough about something that you're willing, frankly, to lose your job over it. That is very uncomfortable, but it is the truth. And you do have to have alignment from the top down. And, you start there, certainly, but grassroots bottom up support is how these things happen. You could have all the yes and fundings and everything. You've got to have all that. That's a given. But to actually have long lasting change, you have to be an evangelist for the change. And that means at the grassroots. So at Universal specifically, that is where I had to start. They did recognize what I had done at Disney. So they recognized that I knew how to do this. They also recognized I persevered in the face of tough economic times. But frankly, the top leadership was a little afraid of the change. And rightly so. I mean, this was big. This was bringing, the Florida theme park had lived in Disney's shadow since its existence. And Disney always reminded them of that on a regular basis. But the Wizarding World of Harry Potter was about to change that. All of a sudden, you're going to be on the world stage. And what I found amazing was how much the, you know, team members rallied around the kinds of change that needed to be pushed through from just a online and digital relaunch, basically, of the whole park, which meant marketing, it meant sales, it meant e-commerce, it meant ticketing, it meant mobile ticketing, it meant, you know, all of those kinds of things, all new point of sale systems. And just when, you know, the project was big enough, I'd say, but we really need to do this part too, because while we're in here, we might as well. And so, yeah, I think just being bold, courageous, and sometimes willing to lose your job over, because at the end of the day, the person who might be chosen to be the right person to forge it through and lead it through might not be the right person to shepherd it when it's done. And that's what happened to me at Universal Studios. Is I turned out to be the right person to get it done, but in the end, you know, it was determined that I wasn't the right person to run it once it was up. And you know what, they were at the time, I remember thinking, what, of course I'm the right person. But as time wore on, and I've now had the benefit of 2020 hindsight, is, yeah, that was really right. I am a change adrenaline junkie, and I needed to go where the next kind of big change was.
Yeah, well, that's an inspiring story. I remember I had the same reaction though when I heard that you were leaving there. I don't know if you remember, but I was in Bali and I got a call.
Oh, right.
I was working at a Tony Robbins event there, and I got a call from Bill Davis, who was the CIO. I think he's still the CEO at Universal, and letting me know. And I thought, that's insane. That's the stupidest thing I ever heard. And I would say, sorry, Bill, if you're listening, but number one, I don't think he's listening, and number two, I'm really not sorry. So. But but obviously, whether or not what you say is accurate, that it was the right move. It certainly was the right move for you, because clearly it was one of the wonderful examples of how, you know, a window closes, a door opens, or whatever, or, you know, how, you know, if you were still there, you would never have done the things that made. So, you know, sometimes it's great for the person, even if it is the wrong decision for the company. But I want to double down on this point that you made that I think is so brilliant about being willing to lose your job. I think in some ways it may be the heart of everything to do with digital transformation, and the flip side, right? The fear being one of the biggest barriers of companies and individuals really going there. And I wonder if you have any psychology tips for people who are in those kind of roles, because as you point out, it's not an irrational fear. It's not like a fear of heights or something. Like, you could very well lose your job if you push too hard on these transformations, and yet you may need to do that in order to get the company where it needs to go. And as you pointed out, you may do both. You may succeed for the company and then lose your job, the ultimate, you know, unfairness. Any tips for someone who's sitting there thinking, yeah, you know, I hear you, but I am afraid to lose my job. I am afraid of pushing too hard. Any thoughts for that person?
Yeah, I mean, it does take a bit of finesse. You know, it takes a bit of certainly, you know, from a psychological perspective, getting to know people and building relationships. So, you know, each person is an individual, and you know how far you can push them. And you don't ever be sort of the bull in the china shop, just racing in with transformative ideas. I mean, I always say a transformation, it really is a marathon that starts with really good relationships, good ideas, so that you can build some trust that'll give you enough runway to get some wins under your belt. And if you get a few wins under your belt, get some points up, people are going to give you longer. They're going to start to give you more money. And so you get to prove yourself along the way. And depending on the situation, depending on how much time you have, Universal, I did not have as much time as I've luckily had at the NFL, and I had at Disney, because we had this big thing. I mean, it was opening. The Wizarding World was opening. So many hard decisions had to get made. And I frankly knew I was breaking China. I knew there were times when I were breaking relationships, and it used to keep me up at night. And what I would say to people who have to do that, you know, find a good partner. Howard was often that person to me that I would talk late into the night about, oh my God, you know I really stepped in at this time. I pushed too hard. And then I would find someone else I worked with to sort of say, like, how do we, you know, work through things together? And but it does take a certain amount of self-confidence that I think believing in yourself must start when you're a child. It doesn't just all of a sudden you begin to believe in your own abilities. So I guess I have my parents to thank for the fact that I believe, well, if I lose this job, I'll just go find another one. And I'll need to negotiate on the way out so that I'm not hanging out there, unemployed and not able to care for my family. But at the same time, I know there are just, lots of companies out there that could use bright, smart, change thought leaders. So,
yeah, 100%. So let's move on and let's talk a little about the NFL, which I know everyone wants to know about the NFL. What will be happening this season? Who's going to win the Super Bowl? All that inside information I know you have because we've been working together there. I know some of what's going on, but I'd love to hear it from you. I'm sure people would about the challenges that the NFL is facing right now and how digital does or doesn't, play into that and the transformation that you're working on there now. Anything you can share?
I'll start with the fact that what really attracted me to come to work at the NFL, other than the fact that I am a huge football fan and frankly was raised to, I did dream about this, but I honestly never really gave it an actual thought about that it would happen. But they didn't have a CIO in 2012. There wasn't a position that was leading technical transformation. There were people within each division who were doing lots of great things, who were very interested, but they didn't have anybody to knit it together. So that started in 2012, and a lot has changed. Just watching the game, you can see how much more technology is a part of the game every day. You can see it on the sidelines. You can see it on your broadcast with next-gen stats and things like that. But what I'd say the thing that has put it to the test more than anything is being ready before you need to be ready was the situation we're in with the pandemic, and how on early March, we were planning an amazing draft in Las Vegas. And we went from that to doing it from everybody's homes with very little time to plan. And the only way we did and pulled that off was that we had already gone through a digital transformation. If you had not gone through the digital transformation and gotten hit with that, there was no way you could have pivoted to all of that video moving through the cloud, all of the documents that you needed living in the digital world, and people being able to work and be remote, just like you and I are doing right now. If we hadn't have already gone through that, we would not have been able to do it. And that probably was my proudest career moment, was to see that something that is so beloved to America as football, and to be such an important part of these young men's lives as they really fulfill their dreams, to have taken away the draft from them and turned it into a phone call that you've been drafted would have just been terrible. And so the fact that we were able to produce a show and get that off, and now we have a season underway, is nothing short of amazing, with a lot of amazing team members who all care so passionately about our product.
And not to mention the fact that from a business perspective as well, the draft is huge money, right? Huge broadcast rights, a lot of advertising sold on that television programming. And not only were you able to save that revenue in terms of having that program, but correct me if I'm mistaken, but I believe this was the most watched draft in history. It was really the most successful draft program ever run by the league, probably by any league, I would guess, because I'm assuming the NFLs are the biggest to begin with. That's amazing. I almost feel I see also, to your point about having gone through digital transformation, this direct connection that never could have been seen in advance between the work that we worked on together a few years prior, moving the moving the instant replay process on the field to the officiating command center. And some people may know what I'm referring to, and some people may be like, I don't know what he's talking about. But if you see that connection too, I'd love your thoughts, because it seems to me that even though that was a totally different problem that you were trying to solve in many ways, the broader view you took of it in terms of what it meant for the ability the league needed to have around, in this case, sort of video and the digital capabilities around video, I think is what you're referring to when you talk about at least one part of the digital transformation that enabled you guys to rapidly save the draft in a way that meant, I'm sure, I don't know how much money, but way more than you ever spent probably on that digital transformation, I'm guessing, just from that one event, let alone all the other benefits.
Yeah, it's true. You know, when you lead IT, um, you're often not seen as a revenue, producer, and a lot of times, you're pushed on by the CFO and others that are, oh my God, you're spending so much money. And that's true. I do spend a lot of money on technology, but just like building a beautiful building, you have to architect it right, and you can't just, if someone comes to me and asks, which is what happened, that we'd like to centralize instant replay, we'd like the person that's looking under the hood at the replay at the field, we want the same exact thing happening here at 345 Park in the NFL headquarters, so that we can assist in making the calls, keep the games moving. That was the request. But like any good architect, you think about, okay, well, that's the request today. But if I give them that, I bet you 5 steps ahead, they're going to want to do this and we're going to do that. So architecting it the right way led to really cloud solutions. And this was, back in the day, AWS and Microsoft Azure, and all of these were like introducing cloud platforms. And we were like, oh well, let's use those. And that also ended up being a huge sponsorship partnership between Amazon for Next Gen Stats and Microsoft for the Surface tablet and for Teams. So along the way, not only did we prepare for this big moment that we didn't know we were going to have, but we got some amazing partners who pay us money as well, but help us solve problems. So the first people we called right away when my team and I and the broadcast engineers were on the phone trying to figure out how to do this was a phone call to AWS, a phone call to Microsoft. And when I'm saying we're calling AWS, I mean I'm calling Andy Jassy. Like, that's what the NFL does for you. Like, you could just call the head, you could just
People
call the
take your call.
CEO,
Yeah.
and they take your call, and then they want to help you. And so it wasn't done alone. It was done on a good, strong backbone, and then with a lot of collaboration with our partners, which made it come to life.
What were some of the challenges that you had to convince the organization to take that bigger, broader view, if any?
Yeah, well, in the beginning, what I sold, the specific request that you're referring to about officiating was really packaged it up into a program just called The Future of Football. And, you just have to be a little bit of a marketer too when you're a CIO, if you're a good one that gets stuff approved. You have to be able to tell a story, not just about, oh, we got to put this stuff in the cloud or we got to build a data warehouse. Believe me, if you call a data warehouse, it will never get approved. So you better have a good little story to go with it that actually tells the story. And so packaging it up as the future of football meant that we might not all be in the same place at the same time. We might need to move stuff very quickly, real time. And the commissioner, our CFO, our head of strategy, and our head of football, they all bought into the story, which got the funding going. And then once our coaches and players and our team ownership saw the results, they just wanted more, which I think that's one of the biggest challenges when you are a CIO, or if you are the person in charge of digital transformation, is once the pipeline opens, you'll just be flooded with requests. And then you have to put in a whole organization that's called demand management so that you can manage the demand. And then if you're not careful, you all of a sudden become that IT department that nobody wants to come to because you're saying no to them. And so always balancing between those two is the thing that I have to remind myself. And I tell others in the organization to please let me know because now I've been here 8 years and I know how much work we have. And so protecting my team from time to time will say, oh no, we can't take that on. And, I have good partners at the NFL who will say, yeah, you're going to need to take that one on. So anyway, that's also kind of the dynamics of how these things get off the ground.
Yeah, yeah. Well, absolutely. And I mean, what I've seen you do over and over is grow IT teams so that you have more resources because the organization, instead of you going to the organization and saying, hey, I'm your new CIO, I want to build an empire, you create demand. And the next thing you know, they're demanding so much more of you that, of course, you need more people to get it done so you can meet those needs. And there's a part of me that thinks all that stuff that you're talking about packaging things up is why the power of, I was joking at the beginning about how the secret to becoming the CIO of the NFL is to go to work for PricewaterhouseCoopers as an auditor. But I think there's some truth to this because what you bring together is the ability to think of things from a real business perspective and be able to position things totally independent of IT, because a lot of the people who you have to get to agree to the money, they understand very little about technology, but they understand business. And so what I've seen you do is speak to them in that language. And that's how you go from, I need this one problem solved, and them asking you what would be the cheapest way to just get this single problem that we have right now solved, to you painting a picture for them of a much larger investment that is going to be aligned to their needs in the future.
Yeah, and then I think, having the right kind of technical talent that I can translate to, who will trust me not to hang them out there. And that's a really big part of you. If you lead technical engineers, they have very little trust in things. And I think that might be why they're very good at what they do. So I don't ever want to take that away. Yeah, they trust computers, but they don't trust people. So working hard to get them to trust that, I've got them, and, I'm not going to hang them out. But I will say there's a guy who works for me. His name is John Cave. He's amazing.
Awesome
architect. Awesome guy, and he comes up with the best ideas. But I can't tell you how many times we've closed the door in my office, or in the last 6 months been on a Zoom and said, is this one of those things that could get either one of us fired? And I'll be like, this is exactly the thing that could get both of us or either one of us fired. And then he goes, okay, then we got to do it. So I even got,
your partner in crime.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we get going and get it underway, and then the business comes along, and because I came from shadow IT, I love shadow IT. If you have enough time and you have smart people on your team and you want to go try to build something, I'll give you the right guardrails and the right sandbox so you can't impact the rest of the company, and that spurs innovation. If you try to make all innovation happen in one place, it's just not going to happen. So you have to be, if you're a CIO trying to make that turn to be a digital leader, you got to learn to and learn to love and embrace people that are doing shadow tech work within their business.
Yeah, absolutely. One last question for you, if I might. We've talked about how a key part of what you've been able to do is see how the needs of today are going to become the needs of tomorrow, which mean you're able to sell into an organization broader transformation. And of course, with COVID, we saw how some of the stuff that you were selling more broadly has really turned out to save the bacon, really, of the organization by being ready, even though you didn't know. Of course, none of us knew specifically what was going to happen. There was going to be a pandemic and those types of things, but you knew that these types of needs would be there. So what are the chess moves that you're seeing ahead? What are the things you're telling people now? This is what we're going to want 2 years from now. This is what we're going to want 5 years from now. These are the things that we need to be preparing for.
Wow, that's a really good question, because I have been it's for the first time in my career, I have been just barely keeping my head above water for a few months now. And this was such a shock to the nation as a whole and the world that we were living in this pandemic that I haven't had as much, thinking time. I feel like one of those. I know Silicon Valley companies always give their top people sabbaticals. So there's an idea, Roger. Could I have a sabbatical where I could go away and think about the next great thing?
They've been letting you work at home. They've been letting you work at home for the last 9 months. What more do you want?
I know. I'm back in my office. Yeah, all that staying at home was, just me relaxing on the couch. But the next big things I think are still going to be around how people collaborate and communicate. I think this has just opened the door wide open. I do think the types of employees you hire and the expectations that they have of you are going to change. We've been saying this for a while, that first it was the millennial workforce, and then it was, I don't think we'll ever work the same. I don't think people will work the same that they've worked ever. And this is almost like another revolution, another industrial revolution on how people do work. And it's how people do white collar work and how people do, where they are when they do it. And so that's a little more on the enterprise side, but it's also on the digital consumption of media and how is media consumed. We've also been talking about that cord cutters, long form content, appointment style viewing. All of that is NFL's bread and butter. But we do know that people are consuming our content differently. So setting it up so that they can get it wherever they want it, whenever they want it, however they want it, requires a lot of technology infrastructure to do. So I think that's a really big next generation thing that all media companies are very, very quickly working on. They've already been working on, but it's all been accelerated now.
Yeah. So hopefully some of the work that you've already been doing is already preparing for where you're going to be in 18 months or 2 years, and just keep that progress going. I actually think that live sports has an advantage in this area because it's one of the only areas where there's already a substantial business in both the live event and the simultaneous broadcast event. You don't see that in too many places. You don't see it in film. You don't see it in staged theater, or most types of live events don't have a monetized component, which is also broadcast. But what I'm seeing today, of course, with a lot of live events like business conferences, for example, or seminars or other things, where even university educations, where we have now this simultaneous experience. Half the kids are in the classroom, half are home at Zoom,
right?
Zoom, right? Those types of things, and that's how a football game is, right? Where you have to simultaneously program for not, you have this a little bit in a studio audience with like a sitcom or the Tonight Show, but that's different because you're not trying to monetize that audience. That audience is only there to make a better experience for the home viewer. But with football and other live sports, you have a major revenue stream that comes from the people that are there live, and then you've got another major revenue stream that comes from the home viewer. So I wonder if there's anything that others can learn from what already has been learned in live sports that can start to be applied in other domains.
Well, yeah, for sure. I mean, one of the biggest examples is the legalization of sports betting. And so we know there was a whole section of, revenue that we weren't participating in because we were not enabling or any way associated with sports betting. But now we are the official sort of betting feed. So anybody that takes bets on NFL games has to get the stat as well as the video and the whole system to stop bets and all these kinds of interesting regulation things. We built that also out of the same platform that ultimately, we started with back when we were moving instant replay. So, and then next gen stats and putting chips on players and selling that to broadcasters as an additional revenue stream over and above sort of what their rights fee is for the broadcast. We can sell add-ons now. And so, yeah, I think that stuff's just going to keep happening. And we are going to always, certainly have this, and we believe this appointment style viewing of watching a football game is our bread and butter, but there's so much around it that tying it all underneath our business development team and the guys who negotiate all our broadcast deals are, in the process of making sure there are carve outs for these businesses to grow and foster and participate with our broadcasters.
Yep. Well, exciting times. And I'm always excited to keep an eye on what you're working on and where you're working, because I know that whatever you're working on and wherever you're working, there's something really cool coming. And I've seen that year after year after year. So excited to see where you've got coming next. And when I have the opportunity to participate, as you very often allowed us to do, it's always a thrill. So thanks so much, Michelle, for joining us on the podcast, for, of course, the introduction to the book, Winning Digital Customers, coming out in October. And anything else you want viewers to know about you or connecting with you or anything like that?
No, you can find me on LinkedIn as well as Twitter is at NFL CIO. And I'm just so fortunate to have such a cool job and great relationships that I've built along the way. And I'm always open to hearing any of your stories too, because that's where I learn what's happening next is I really do stay engaged with the community. So would love to hear from you.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Michelle. Thank you all for watching. See you next time.
Thanks.